So first of all, good morning, Don. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Uh, Thank you for dedicating some of your time for us to talk about some Boba Fett stuff. It'd be kind of cool to do. We're doing a thing for May, being the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. So we're kind of calling it May the 40th. So we kind of want to just kind of hang out and talk some Boba Fett.
Sounds good.
So with Boba Fett being such an iconic character, and he having such few lines in the original trilogy and such few scenes, when the special editions released and there were additional scenes added, we were all very excited. So how did be that you were the guy who got to put the suit on and help add to the legacy of Boba Fett?
Well, at the time I was splitting my time between working at Lucasfilm Archives and Industrial Light and Magic as a model maker. So depending on where the work was, I would be able to bounce back and forth. So I was kind of like the only I was handling all the character appearances and managing the archives and all that during that period. And so we had done a number of character excuse me, a number of character appearances prior, and I had done I because of necessity. Typically it's like, oh, we need another person to do this. I would jump into a costume, so I would be a stormtrooper or whatever. Typically I didn't do that. I just because I was typically managing the appearance, or I would be operating R2D2, which is the bigger role that I actually used to do. But there was one occasion where I did we were opening 94, I think it was, December, October, November, something like that in 94. We were opening a big exhibition in San Francisco for of Star Wars memorabilia, and they wanted to have a Boba Fett, and we had our regular actors for Darth Vader, and I'm not sure if Chewbacca was in that one. We had some stormtroopers, and we had Imperial officer or something like that. Anyway, the idea is that where Lucasfilm is located is in Marin County, which is across the bay from San Francisco. And so they thought this is a museum, Yerba Buena Center, thought it would be a good PR move. It's like if we took the ferry in from Marin County over to San Francisco. So you take the ferry from a town called Larkspur and go over to San Francisco, hop on a cable car, and ride it to, well, actually it wasn't a real cable car. It was a truck that looked like a cable car, which they have as tourist attractions in San Francisco, and then drive over to the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. So so we did that, and like I said, we had the other characters were all spoken for, but we needed a Boba Fett, and I was there, so I just like, I'll put that costume on. So I knew I could fit in it. I was roughly Jeremy's size and everything. So that was essentially the first time I did it. I might have done it someplace else. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, fast forward a couple of years, and they're doing the special edition, and I was helping still manage the archives for a bit there. And one of the things I was doing was, for the ramp up to all the special edition reshoot or pick up things that they were doing, I was helping them get assets and costumes and different things like that for the shooting. And one of the things that came up was they wanted the Bith mask from the original Cantina sequence that was sculpted by Doug Beswick. And the thing is that all those masks from the original Cantina were not actually part of the Lucasfilm archives, because at the time, Rick Baker, famous makeup artist, did American Werewolf in London and Thriller, and he actually played King Kong in the 1976 King Kong. He was hired to assemble a team of people to put together these more creatures for the Cantina sequence. And this is a very long answer, isn't it? Rick didn't have time actually to do a lot of the work himself because he was working on a movie called The Incredible Melting Man. And so he hired some stop motion animator friends who were familiar with the process, not necessarily familiar with making masks, but they understood the process of sculpting, casting, and molding, that sort of thing. So he hired John Berg, Phil Tippett, Doug Beswick, Lane Liska, and a guy named Rob Bottin, who was later went on to become a pretty famous makeup artist in his own right. And so they created all the masks. John in particular was did the hammerhead help mask, which is actually, it wasn't a mask, it was more of an animatronic puppet. And then they, on the day of shooting, they needed all to play these characters, right? So so they took turns putting different masks on, sitting there getting the shot reactions and everything. So they did the Cantina band, and like I said earlier, Doug Beswick had sculpted that mask. And then they wore it for the thing, and they were the band members. Well, like I said, as part of the deal, it was just like, well, they got to keep all the masks. They didn't want, Lucasfilm didn't want them, so all those masks went to various homes. Rick Baker had thrown in some of his own personal masks that he had made, and like the little devil guy and the bat kid, and or actually it wasn't bat kid. There's the bat person, and the devil, I know, is one of Rick's pre-made. He didn't make it for Star Wars, he had it. So they just kind of kept it, it just went away and everything. So Lucasfilm Archives didn't have those masks. And so the producer of the special editions at ILM, Tom Kennedy, came up to me and said, we want to get that mask. I had explained the story to him. I said, however, I know where I can get the mask. I said, but the caveat is I have to wear it for the sequence. And he goes, yeah, no problem. So I called up Doug Beswick. He had a mask that everyone else got their own mask that they wore. He still had his that he wore. And we arranged a deal, and he sent it up to us, and I wore it for that sequence. And then on the day of shooting, George and Rick McCallum, the producer, were laughing over in the corner, and Rick comes up to me and during a break and shooting, and this is like 10 o'clock in the morning or something like that, and he said, do we have a Boba Fett costume in the archives? And I had to think about it because we had just sent a bunch of costumes to the Smithsonian for the Magic of the Myths tour that was going on in the mid-90s. And the costume, in fact, that I probably wore on that day when I went to San Francisco, was in Washington, D.C. So while we had extra copies, we didn't have a whole complete suit that was all put together, ready to go and, walk out the door. I said, yeah, I probably could pull one together. And he goes, okay, good. George has this brilliant idea. He says he's going to have, because the dancers were there, he's going to have Boba flirting with the dancers. I said, oh, okay. And he said, and who could wear that costume? And I thought, well, because I had worn it once before. I said, well, I can wear it. He goes, okay, great. At lunchtime, go up, get a costume, and come back, and at the end of the day, we'll shoot that. And that's what we did. And I had roughly about 10 minutes to pull together that costume. So I have incurred the wrath of Boba Fett fans across the world because of its inconsistency, but I had 10 minutes to put that thing together. And it was all from memory. I had to remember all the bits and pieces because they were all scattered. Their helmets were over here, jumpsuits were over there, armor was there. Nothing was in the same spot. And it's like, oh yeah, I think I need those arm things. And so I was running around, and I had to also, not everything, that one costume that we had was in the best condition. That was off in Washington. So I had to look at it and figure out of these pieces I have in front of me, which is the best. And not all of them were good. For instance, the backpack was a real challenge to pick because all the backpacks had some sort of damage on them. And so I figured, well, if depending on the angle, as long as the rocket and the little jet nozzles are intact, we're good. And the one I picked has a big scar across it, because it was the scar was intentional. It was from apparently a cut scene where the it looks to me like a laser lightsaber slash, but I assume also that it could have been when Han Solo poked him with the stick. But anyway, I had this backpack that had this big scar in it. So so I picked that, and that's how I came to wear it. And we shot it at the end of the day, and it was done in about 15 minutes, and we all went home. So
it's all your fault, Don. It's all your fault.
It's completely.
Yeah, exactly.
The reason why it's a
found the
mishmash of 3 different costumes. It's all your fault. No, that's awesome.
You say the ire, yet it's the fascination of many costumers that have just been trying to research that 10 minutes of assembly for years.
Yeah, well, it's funny that I was at a Comic-Con in Cincinnati in September, and there's a cosplayer that came dressed up as me, which was quite the honor. I'm not sure if he did the multi-suit things, but
and not only did he dress up as Boba Fett, but he dressed up as Don Bies as Boba Fett.
Yeah.
Your appearance has been cemented in the legacy of Boba Fett.
Yeah,
with a beautiful mustache and nice big glasses.
I was going to ask if this cosplayer had the glasses and the mustache to truly fully do you.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I guess I had a quick promptery question here in the middle, which, between wearing Boba Fett and those Bith musicians, did you find one significantly more comfortable than the other?
Well, they both had their ups and downs. The Bith was incredibly hot because it's just a big rubber balloon on top of my head, and it was very it wasn't uncomfortable as far as a fit or anything like that, because it just filled over, but it had very little air holes, and I know that they suffered from that when they shot the film originally. They didn't put any air holes. They didn't think about that at the time. And again, these guys were stop motion animators. They weren't mask makers. They weren't makeup artists. So they rectified that by cutting like air with a razor blade into the gills just to get some air venting in there. So, I mean, there was some airflow in the mask, but it wasn't that bad. The worst part about that costume was that the shoes that they had me wear were women's shoes, I guess because they liked the style or something. I don't know. So I have relatively wide foot, and those were pretty narrow. So those were pretty painful after a while. But I guess overall, except for the backpack, the costume, the Boba Fett costume was much more comfortable. Again, that backpack I wore had metal. It was reinforced with metal because they had canisters that could be put in there. They weren't in there, but there's canisters that put in there for smoke gags and other gags. So it was probably more heavy than the typical Boba Fett backpack. But it was, like I said, it was the end of the day. It was hot. It was really hot on the set. We were all exhausted. We'd been there since 7 o'clock or whatever. And this was like around 7 p.m. when we were doing this. So it was kind of a blur. It was never something I thought would follow me around as long as it has. I mean, the things I've done, so many other things contributed to the Star Wars universe in so many other ways. And but this is the one that'll be on my gravestone, I assume. So
heavy is the head that wears the helmet, that's for sure.
With that, I will pass it over to Jeremy.
Yeah, hi Don.
Hi.
So I have studied every Boba Fett costume out there, all of the original trilogy stuff for years, from a costuming requirement perspective. So to hear you say that you picked out that amazing mishmash of all different walks of Boba Fett costume life is amazing to me, because I mean that costume has the Empire Strikes Back Wookiee braids, the Empire Strikes Back helmet, Return of the Jedi stunt chess pieces. It's got pre-production 2 left knee on there. You've got just a whole bunch of costuming parts from all the different walks of life for Boba Fett. So to me, I think it's fascinating. It's all of the imperfections with that costume that make it so special. And each version of the Boba Fett costume has those subtle imperfections. You know, you've got the crack in the Empire Strikes Back helmet. You've got some Return of the Jedi nuances, but the Return of the Jedi SE costume, embodying pretty much every aspect of Boba Fett, whether it be repainted parts or just, you know, like I said, the pre-production 2 knee just slapped on there, makes it real special to me. Plus, and I'm going to get to my question here in a second, but your character, that version of the character in the SE scenes, kind of immortalized a different side of Boba Fett that most never even thought of, right? So I'm an Empire Strikes Back Boba Fett costumer. It is the only costume that I own and that I work on, as you can see around me, all Empire Strikes Back stuff, but very militant side to Boba Fett, right? So number one, I want to ask you, and you talked about the flirting piece that George wanted to bring into that scene, flirting with the dancers. Was the chin nudge your idea? Was that you, or was that a directed act?
So I have a question for you about the armor. I'll come back to that. But
That's right.
There was a direction. So embarrassingly, as I came out, as everyone has seen in the pictures, behind the scenes pictures, I don't think I might not have had my backpack on at that point, and I didn't have the helmet on. And when I walked back onto the set, we went around the set. This was shot in San Rafael, California, by the way. And we went around the back of the set. I got dressed and I came back around. George laughed and he referred to me as Boba's accountant. And Bob Fett, I guess, I don't know. And then he says, yeah, he says, when you're done, bounty hunting, in the evening, you come and work on Jabba's books, something. So anyway, he walked, we were talking and he says, okay, so what I want to do is, he says, when you're talking, you're just hanging out, talking with the girls, and he says, and then when I cue you, he says, I want you to reach up and, stroke her cheek like this. And he's doing this to me, mind you. George is stroking my cheek. He's showing me how to do it. And I'm like, okay. And he says, so I'll cue you and you do that. Oh, okay. And I went up there and I had Mercedes, who plays Ristal, I think is the character. We because of the way the day was going and everything like that, we never met. I mean, until I walked up on that, even though we were next to each other, we were doing our own thing there. They were doing their own thing. They had a choreographer. We were making up our own moves. So when we'd take a break, they'd go that way, they go that way. Of course, I wasn't there for lunch because I was at the archives. So we never really met. And I walked up there and they're placing them around me and everything like that. And we're just standing there talking. So that's what some of the behind the scenes photos that are there that have been seen. And George might have given me the idea to put my arm up on the thing that I can't recall. Anyway, we get to this point and we're talking and George, they're shooting and rolling and George is, he says, just be talking to the girls. And I wasn't saying, I'm not an actor. I wasn't saying anything. They were talking to me and really flirting with me. And they were getting pretty racy, which I was finding incredibly amusing. And they were asking me about my rocket pack and all sorts of really sophomoric jokes that they were doing. And then at one point George says, look over here, and neither Mercedes or I heard what he said, and we kind of like, what was that? And looked at the camera, and that's in the film. and then he says, okay, Boba now. And so as I'm looking at Mercedes, like I said, I haven't seen her prior to this whole thing. I realized she's got this a very intricate paint job with, grease paint and cake makeup and everything on the side of her face. And I felt that if I rubbed her and caressed her face like that, I would just smear all that, so I just did not, I thought, well, it less my improv, and I just did under the chin and I walked off. And the entire place erupted in laughter. And it was incredibly embarrassing because I thought, did I screw up? And my wife was actually there. My wife was standing in for not Sice Noodles, the other guy. And because they needed some sort of CG reference, and she just happened to be available. She's not a performer or anything like that, but if you look in some of the behind the scenes footage and stills, she's in it. And so she was standing off to the side because she was, helping me with the costume as well. And I said, why are they laughing? What was so funny? She says, it was just funny. It just was funny. So I was really embarrassed. And then I think we did it a second time, and then that's it. So.
Well, to hear that that was you that made that decision, that's pretty awesome. Because that is literally something that we as Boba Fett cosplayers do for many photos with our fans, in many cons and in all of our troops. If it's appropriate and somebody wants us to do the chin nudge, we'll do it for them. So that was immortalized. The swagger that was seen in that scene is it's a different side of Boba Fett. And that's my next question is, how did it feel to bring that kind of flair to such a militant character? Because I know you knew the backstory of Boba Fett more than most, enough to put together a costume for him in 10 minutes, which is still amazing to me. You knew the backstory of the character. Empire Strikes Back, one of the greatest movies ever. One of the most elusive characters in the movie, captured Han Solo, very, very little compassion for anything. Then here you are in a situation where you're able to show a different side of Boba Fett. How did that feel?
I'd be honest, I wasn't thinking about it a whole lot. The fact that it seemed a bit out of character was amusing to me. When Rick told me about what they wanted, I laughed. I thought, oh, that'd be cute. But I didn't think too deeply about it. It just was, George had a funny idea, so let's try it. We didn't even really know if it was going to be in the film, to be honest with you. George shoots a ton of stuff that might not make it in, and so it's very possible that he could have found it, it doesn't work. So yeah, again, and to be honest, and I know I say this with potentially great fear with this group of people. I was never a big Boba Fett fan. I was, R2D2 was my guy, Darth Vader and R2D2 were my two favorite. And so when Boba Fett came along, I thought it was an interesting character. I thought it was really clever, particularly in Empire. I thought he kind of went out like a punk in Jedi. It's like, oh yeah, that was kind of lame. But he wasn't like, he wasn't up there. I didn't hate him, but he wasn't up there. So for me to have this awesome responsibility and not being necessarily one of my top favorite characters is kind of been, bit of a burden I bear all these years.
Well, we are definitely glad that you were in the right place at the right time to be that person in the suit. R2D2 is awesome. Vader is, Vader. But for us bounty hunters, there is no higher rank than to actually put on a costume like that. And being Boba Fett and the involvement that you had in putting together that costume, from my perspective, is pretty awesome. And I'm not going to let it down for you, Don. That's the greatest thing that you've ever done. And Django's pretty cool. Sorry, Casey, but
I wore the Django costume too.
Yeah, that's the one thing I was going to say. It's not we're talking more Return of the Jedi here, but I did want to mention that, up until recently when Tamara came back, you were the only guy that had worn both Jango Fett and Boba Fett costumes in official capacity.
Yeah.
And it was like you had both of best of both worlds there.
And I can verify for a fact that Jeremy's taller than Tamara because the Tamara's costume did not fit very well on. So, but yeah, well, thank you for your thing. The thing is I was never sure that Boba was one of George's favorite characters. I have nothing to base this on, but just the fact that that he went out in such a lame way, leads me to believe that George, thought, oh, that would be amusing, so he would have never done it. I think with, R2 would have never, because that's one of his favorite characters. So I don't think he would have done it had he liked Boba more. Again, that's just totally my opinion. I'm not speaking for George, nor did I ever hear anything along those lines. But
yeah. We don't need a vendetta against George here.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
No, I do feel that Boba served a very specific purpose in Empire Strikes Back, and then coming into Return of the Jedi, where the storyline really does take kind of a turn towards the good, winning out in the end. They didn't know what to do with the character, and rather than have some long drawn out demise of Boba Fett, just throw him into the hole in the desert and be done with it. It was,
and to be fair, I think in the Jedi, from a character standpoint, Han Solo didn't have a whole lot to do. He was just there to serve the purpose so that they could be together again. But although he helped with the rebellion, but I mean, from a character standpoint, certainly not as strong a character as he was in Empire. So or the original film. So I think. I think a little bit of that happened probably with Han Solo. It's like, not sure what we should do with him. So, but we've got him around. We better do something. And I also was always surprised, and I'm pretty sure George probably feels this way as well, is how the cult of Boba Fett, how much it took over, and how so many people were taken with the character. So.
Myself included. Now, you said in the beginning you had a question for me about the armor.
Oh yeah, you referred to the armor as the stunt armor. What makes you call it the stunt armor?
The MOM armor, the Magic of Myth armor, that suit that was shipped away and was on tour is what we would consider the hero armor. That was the actual armor that Jeremy wore in the original Return of the Jedi. You can compare the dents, you can compare the different details of the paint, and that's what Jeremy wore. And then what was left around was the stunt armor that Dickie wore, which was painted very, very closely to the original hero armor. But actually, pieces of that were the repainted Empire Strikes Back armor. And you can see that up close in some of the references, where you can see some of the damage details underneath the green that they repainted over. So right there is very fascinating that you can not only is it, we don't really, stunt armor is, I don't want that to sound negative, but it shows the lineage of some of the armor pieces from Empire Strikes Back, which we for a long time thought those were lost forever. But then like I said, I've been studying these costumes for a long time, very up close reference analysis. And what we found was that a lot, if not all, of the Empire Strikes Back armor was repurposed for either Return of the Jedi or the Return of the Jedi stunt armor. So pretty fascinating stuff there, and good to see that armor wasn't stolen, didn't just get lost to the ether, and was actually repurposed for more Star Wars.
Well, from archivist standpoint, when I was managing the collection standpoint, are you accounting for the character appearance costumes that were made?
So those, yes, we've seen a lot of the original painted by Sandy and her crew, which is a very different paint scheme than what Joe and his group painted. Very different techniques in their layering, very different in what they looked like, and the tour references that we have that are public, that we're allowed to see, are very different from, like I said, from what was used in both Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Not sure which ones of those were painted over, but I think those, from what I've seen, and I'm just a layman looking at pictures, all of those are pretty much still intact, and we have some of those references of those like the touring type parade type costumes that were used for signings and things like that. Those are still intact in the archives, correct?
Well, yes, and they're all mixed together.
Mhm.
And one thing to be aware of is that there is actually stunt armor, and it's
Mhm.
not rigid fiberglass. It was
Right,
made
the
out
foam.
of flexible urethane. Yeah.
Yeah, we
So
picked
so when you refer to stunt armor, that's in my mind what stunt armor is. It's a flexible ones.
And that makes sense. And we do have there's a really funny photo of Boba Fett climbing the side of the sail barge, and you can absolutely tell the bracers, the gauntlets that he's wearing are very foam looking.
Right.
And I actually did an analysis of all of the different Return of the Jedi bracers that were used in it, at least all of the references that we have. And yeah, the foam bracers were definitely apparent. But there were some of the costume that, for example, the Empire Strikes Back Wookiee braids, the blonde, the brown, the black, and the gray braids. When Boba Fett falls over on the skiff after he was kind of cut down by Luke, what have you, you can see in the reference that those are the actual Empire Strikes Back braids. So what we call that is that, well, Jeremy had the real costume on with the horsehair braids and what was originally on the pre-production 1 costume and those pieces. He had those saved for him. But then when Dickie had the costume on and the other stunt guys, they would kind of throw on these other costumes that were from the previous versions. And only when you stop the video and zoom in do you see these little differences of, hey, that's actually the Empire Strikes Back version right there. And you see those little differences, which is, again, to me, is fascinating, having to study all of the references of the costume itself. It's finding those little nuances and seeing where the costume ended up in the end is for someone like me who is somewhat of a purist of Boba Fett. It's fascinating to me.
The Boba falling to the deck of the skiff was one of the associate producers at ILM called Louis Friedman. That was shot as an insert at ILM and not down out in the desert. So that was shot at yet a different time. And although I know Dickie, Dickie, I'm not quite sure how many times Dickie actually was in is Boba Fett in that. He even admits himself he doesn't remember. Because Glenn Randall did the flying in shot. And I'm not sure, who was in Yuma, because it wasn't Jeremy. I'm not sure who it was in Yuma. That was the bulk of like some of that stuff. But I would be surprised if it was Dickie, because Dickie's shorter than me. Not to cut out Dickie's side gig of all these conventions that he does, but memory's a funny thing. I'm guilty of it myself, but I've heard some things said over the years. It's like, no, that's not. I don't think that's true. So
I know that they had Bob Yerkes do the scene where he's flying from the sail barge to the skiff.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That
backyard.
Yeah. Well, he did. He had his swing set up, which you could see in a shot.
Yeah,
a bit of the swing. Yeah. I'm sorry, Bob. It was Bob that did that swing in, and then it might have been Glenn Randall that did most of the standing around stuff that's on the skiff, because all those guys were stuntmen in the masks and everything that were doing that. So I'm sure it was Glenn that was doing that, and then Bob did the swing, and maybe Dickie did the fall into the pit. I'm not sure.
But Glenn did the skiff fall where Boba falls head first, basically.
Oh, he did. Does he confirm that?
No,
I think,
I
I
was
think
just
Lewis
asking
was
you
on the
if that was-
ground.
Yeah, Lewis.
Or
Yeah,
like
so
on the
when
floor.
Luke cuts the thing and Boba falls onto the floor of the skiff, that's Lewis Friedman. Yeah,
Lewis Friedman.
yeah. And it, like I said, it was shot. I know exactly where it was shot at ILM. They just rolled the skiff out into the parking lot and shot it there. Because they had the skiff at ILM to do all the blue screen stuff of, with Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford and everything.
Man,
So
I bet wearing the costume on set was much better than wearing the costume down in Yuma. I'm in Arizona.
I'm sure it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Arizona, and I know in Yuma, it's hotter in Yuma than it is anywhere else in Arizona. So
Yeah. It was. I can't imagine it was. Yeah. Matter of fact, where they shot the skiff, the blue screen stuff is where we shot the Jedi Rock sequence too. Same stage, which still exists. It's called 3210 Studios now. So.
Awesome.
I was just going to ask here, Don. Yeah, I was just going to ask here, Don. You said you mentioned that you wore the kit ahead of time. Were there other appearances that you've made in the costume that comparable to your internal scenes? Did you have to wear it outside or any of these other events, maybe a parade or something else later? With you being so involved with the archives?
No, well, again, other costumes I started at Lucasfilm in 1987, and the reason I started was the guy David Schaefer was a guy that there's an interesting lineage of how this got to David and to me ultimately, but David was the guy that did the R2D2 character appearances. So he operated R2, and he was kind of electrical engineer, just all around, handy guy. And he was friends with and worked for a guy named Ed Breed. And now Ed Breed used to work at ILM. And originally, I believe Ed started out in the maintenance department and worked his way up to something else. And then Ed got the job of doing R2, operating R2. And I believe Ed operated R2 for the sequence of Jabba and C-3PO and R2 walking to Jabba's palace, which was shot in California. So in Return of the Jedi. So Ed had a company, and one of the things that they did in the company was they created inflatable costumes for appearances, not necessarily for Star Wars, but for other characters and stuff. And that was based here in California. So this is 1987, was only 4 years or so after Return of the Jedi. So Ed had done a couple of the character appearances at the time. Prior to that, it was other people like Craig Miller did some stuff. There's another guy that did some stuff from Star Wars all the way to Jedi. And so Ed did some of the character appearances stuff, and then eventually handed it off to David, who was his employee. So whenever Lucasfilm would call, we need R2D2 to do this, that, or he did that. So in 87, they did the grand opening of Star Tours at Disneyland. And David went down to operate R2, and he knew Anthony Daniels because he would dress Tony in that as in the costume as well. And while he was down there, he met with Disney Imagineering and got a job with Disney Imagineering. Now there was this slot open to somebody needed to operate R2 for a series of Japanese commercials that Lucasfilm had a contract for over the next 3 years. That was eventually extended to 6 years. So, and the commercials were for Panasonic of Japan, Matsushita. And so they were Japanese commercials, and they starred George Lucas and the Star Wars characters. So David and I knew each other because we had been working at a different company together, making some stuff. And I found out he operated R2, and R2 being my favorite, I said, I built an R2. I built a full-size radio control R2 when Star Wars came out. So I went over to his place, got to see R2, and then so he knew about me. And so when they needed someone to replace him at Lucasfilm, he recommended me, and that's how I got the job. So my very first day of shooting with at Lucasfilm, at my very first gig was on the set of this Japanese commercial at the same stage where we shot Jedi Rocks, and they shot all the blue screen stuff it's called the main stage at ILM. George Lucas was there, Peter Mayhew was there, Anthony Daniels was there. We had another actor for Darth Vader because they didn't want David, and me and as R2. So that was my first introduction. I can't remember what the original question was, but we through those commercials, I did a series of stuff where I was a stormtrooper in a number of the commercials. And again, it was out of necessity more. I mean, of course it was cool. I don't think it's like, oh, I got to put the costume on again. No, I was like totally like, yeah, this would be cool. But a lot of time it was like, well, I'll just put it on, I'm right here. So we did that, and I'm trying to remember if I did any kind of character appearance as Boba aside from that one that we went to the museum. I seem to recall there might have been one. It might have been just for a photo shoot or something like that. But for sure the first one I did was that one that went to the museum. So
That's awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll shoot it back over to Casey here.
Don, what was it like on the set? I know you spoke about, the dancers and having the direction of your movement and things like that, but what was it like just kind of like getting to put the suit on and like the process of wearing it, and how, like, I don't know if you kind of knew in the moment like what was happening as far as like the amount of popularity that this thing would eventually become, but wearing that suit, like, how did that feel as far as just like when you put it on? Because I wear, I got Jeremy points to his guy in the back, I'll point to my guy in the back. I put on a Jango Fett suit, and it's like I feel like I'm almost like a different person, and there's like a little bit of like there is a swagger to you. Did you experience that, have any type of that feeling when you finally got fully suited on?
yeah, I think generally, any of the suits, well, one, they force you in a certain type of posture, immediately. Yeah. And again, with the Fett costume, I had the backpack was relatively heavy, so all of a sudden you have to kind of stand up a little straighter and walk a little differently. And of course, I was consciously thinking when I did it that I gotta be kind of cool, so I probably put a little bit of a swagger into it. I mean, just generally on the set that day, we had done a rehearsal. I seem to recall we shot on a Monday, and on the Friday before, they asked everybody to come in so they could rehearse the number and block where they were on the camera, so that on Monday we would go smoothly, which the shoot would proceed smoothly. And the problem was that on Friday, Nelson Hall, who was the guy who's another Boba, he's the one that walks behind Jabba in that sequence. He was my companion horn section. He was the Greedo looking guy, and which was a mask sculpted specifically for that sequence. The Greedo mask had long gone away, and also it never came to the archives either. So he couldn't make the rehearsal. He was out of town. So we had a mutual friend stand in for him that had done character appearances before, and a guy named Blake. And Blake and I, we're watching the three dancers, professional dancers from the San Francisco and ballet, and another company called the Smuin Ballet from San Francisco. Smuin was named after Michael Smuin, who was the choreographer for the sequence. And he's a friend of George's, and so we're watching them, and they're doing all these dance moves and everything like that, and Blake and I realize it's like, well, we got to do something, we can't just stand here and like so Blake and I came up with our own choreography. So we had, we did like, Blues Brothers kind of like horn section where we were moving and then, doing that kind of stuff, really, really incredibly simple stuff, but we were doing. So we worked it out, again, not being a dancer. Blake's not a dancer. So we worked it out. We came up with this technique. Now the problem was I had to teach it to Nelson because Blake wasn't going to be there. So Nelson came back, I think, on a Saturday. And so Sunday I'm over at Nelson's apartment, I got a copy of they gave me a copy of the music and popped it in. So there we are in his little studio apartment rehearsing the moves for Jedi Rock. So when we went in on Monday, we knew what to do. So yeah, so but once you got there, it was just like boom, 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 boom. You know, like I said, it was really hot. There are pictures of us with the masks off, and we got, you know, cold towels around our necks, drinking water. They took really good care of us. Well, we knew all the crew, you know, all the crew was colleagues that worked at ILM. Annie Pollan was the lead costumer. All the costumes that weren't already established were designed by Ian McCaig. A real interesting thing, that the one dancer, she's the blue Twilight girl, she's wrapped in this black leather straps, and he told me the story later that he needed to come up with a design, so he gave his daughter, who was young at the time, now is an established artist, she's a very good artist now, but he gave his daughter a Barbie doll and said, come up with something. And so she took black electrical tape and wrapped it in a pattern on that. Ian then took that, sketched it out, essentially copied it, and then that was the artwork that they gave, and that's what she created. So her costume was created with black electrical tape. And that poor woman, I can't remember her name, but she they had painted, she was on point shoes, and they had painted her shoes with paint to match whatever the color was, that I can't remember what color scheme it was, but anyway, they painted her shoes, and they painted leather, and leather doesn't, when it paints, it, you know, constricts, it's like getting it wet. So her feet were really, she was really suffering a lot that day. And I remember I saw her at one time from a distance, took the shoes off, and her feet were bloody from the blisters that were forming on her feet because of the constricted painted point shoes. So I wasn't the only one suffering that day. She was probably suffering a lot more. Fortunately, she wasn't as hot as everyone else, because she was essentially not wearing anything. But yeah, she was very uncomfortable. I remember that she was sitting down a lot. And then but just generally the mood on the set was fun. You know, we were there for a purpose. You know, there was certainly no tension on the set. There was a lot of laughing. You know, just generally having a good time. Just being, like I said, standing and being hot for 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever it was exhausting. So
it's funny. Everything that you're saying, everything that you're explaining about this character, it's kind of funny. I have all of these references up in front of me, so I can see exactly what you're describing in some of the photo references that we have of the on-set, behind the scenes Return of the Jedi SE shots. And like, for example, I've just put it in the chat here. You know, you can see her feet are painted blue, and they look really uncomfortable. There you are with your arm kind of up on the archway, you know, getting set up. And it's really fascinating to hear you talk about these references that I have poured over for the better part of 7-8 years now. It's fascinating. It's absolutely great to hear you speak about these moments in time that to me are just a picture, but to you is something that you lived, something that you sweated, you some characters bled for these roles, and that's amazing. And you know, no higher round of applause can I give to something like that. Absolutely amazing.
Well, thanks. One of the, just that reminded me of my arm being up there. There's a continuity. I'm sure you guys caught it, but there's a continuity error where there's a hose in one shot and there's not in the other. And that's because like I said, we shot 2 takes and the hose fell off during one and no one noticed, and we just did it again. Or it fell off, it kept falling off, I think it was. And Nelson Hall said, here, let me just pull it off, pulled it off, and we shot, you know, so yeah.
And there were that costume
movies
was pieced back together later on for a promotional shoot for some ad, and they actually duct taped that hose back on with silver duct tape, and you can see it in the promo shoot reference shots where both hoses on each side are duct taped to the gauntlet. It's pretty amazing. Again, it's those little tiny things that make that costume so awesome to me.
Yeah, well, I always love little things like that. I remember I think you could see in shot in New Hope with there's duct tape pieces of stormtrooper armor that you could see.
Oh yeah, the gaffer tape. It seems like they had gaffer tape around every wrist just in case something fell apart.
Oh, it's well, gaffer tape is a standard. You can't make a movie without gaffer tape. And I was on set on episode 2. We were shooting on Padme's veranda with Anthony Daniels, and I was standing there with Tony, and I had a roll of gaffer's tape in my hand for some reason, and George was there, and it was just a quiet moment for the second there, and I said, I just turned to George, I said, gaffer's tape is like the Force, and he goes, what? I says, it's got a light side, a dark side, and it binds the galaxy together, and he goes, and I walked away. So.
I go to any con, any troop I have a roll of gaffer tape in my huge bin just in case something. I need to tape it on the back side to hold it together. Absolutely.
Yeah, like I said, you can't make movies without gaffer's tape.
That's awesome.
And clothespins, gaffer's tape and clothespins.
I was going to say the best part about the hoses is that you now allow both versions to be right.
Yeah, right. See what I've done for the fandom?
Yeah. Yeah. So Jeremy, you referenced the promo shoot. Is that the one with like the green background that they did?
No, the promo shoot for that's the original Return of the Jedi hero costume. The one I'm talking about is shot much later in. Hold on, I'll go ahead and put it in here in the chat as well. That one right there, which is actually some of the best references that as Boba Fett costumers have. It's very, very clear shots, and that's what we consider the Return of the Jedi Special Edition costume there, complete with the rifle and such. Obviously, Don, they had a little bit more time to put this costume together, make sure that they got all the shin tools, make sure all the hoses were connected. Yeah, they actually swapped out the backpack for the original Return of the Jedi backpack for the shoot. So it's pretty close though. You have the same pre-production 2 left knee, the Empire Strikes Back helmet, the Empire Strikes Back braids, the same chest armor that you grabbed for your shoots, and the same right gauntlet right there is the same as what was seen on screen. So
I believe that's David West Reynolds as Boba, and he did a whole bunch of stuff in the costume for he was one of the authors of the DK books, that the Dorling Kindersley books, and he wanted Boba in there, and he probably it was probably just a fandom moment for him. He's like, well, we got to do another shoot, and no, I'm going to put the costume. But I'm pretty sure that was certainly done after we did the special edition, because I did some stuff. I did the cutaway lightsaber that I made that. Nelson Hall and I did a bunch of other things. We also got to wear the Bith helmet, the Bith mask again. And we all played the band members. We just had one costume with one mask, and we just took different pictures with each of us holding the instruments that we created. And this is for the book. Steve Sansweet has all these things now. I also created for this Dorian Kindersley series, I did the Sith and Jedi holocrons, so for them, so that they photographed. But so that was all done after. So I'm sure what they did is that other costume was still on tour or on a mannequin or whatever as that original costume that was in Magic of the Myth. So I'm sure this one was all, when we packed it up, we just probably put everything in one box and then David probably realized, oh, there's a couple things missing, and put the rest together. So.
And I do have that reference is David West Reynolds as well. This one, I want to share this one. This is actually the closest that we have to what was actually on screen that you had put together. The same boots, everything in here this is what I've found, is that everything in this shot lines up with everything that you were wearing. Is this you in that shot? No.
So what they did is they while I was off getting the costume, everyone broke for lunch, and I believe at that point all the dancers and all the other characters went to we had a little photo studio at Ilum, and they went there and they took some promo photos, and I never got to do that because I was on the way to the archives. So yeah, I'm not sure. This could be David as well. I'm not sure.
So you're saying that they had a little bit more time to compile these suits together than a 10-minute game show shopping spree that you had.
Well, and I would credit that probably David with if these are a little bit more accurate to at least all the components, that's probably due to David, because I doubt that anybody else that was part of that shoot would have known the suit any better, because up until the time I left the archives, which was 96, right before the special editions, I was the only one that actually knew, and obviously even I didn't know that well, but I knew what was involved in each of the costumes. When I left and they brought in other people, the people they brought in were museum conservator type people. They weren't necessarily Star Wars fans. So when they were pulling together things like this after I left, they were all relying on whoever was putting the costume together. And like I said, in this case, it would have been David saying, oh, we need this, oh, we need that, this is missing. So I'm guessing that's what happened, but I don't know for sure.
On your way to the archives, that lunch break, did you have any references that you could pull from to hey, there's a list, there's a photo from original movie to look at, I need this, and this, a shopping list, so to speak?
Nope. No, like I said, it was all from memory. I mean, yes, things like the armor, the chest armor is all one piece. It's like a vest, so you just pop that on. And I knew there's a vest, I knew there's a belt, I knew there's the arm gauntlets. I knew there was the knee things, the jumpsuit, the boots. I'm not sure I even brought a gun because I didn't use I don't have a gun in that. I might have, I can't recall. Again, there were guns there, but they were all busted up. A lot of them were plastic. We never had any of the real weapons in the archives. All the weapons we had were either castings or replica firearms that were modified. Yeah, it was just grabbing what I could remember. Like I said, I wasn't that uneducated in what a Fett costume looked like, but I was like, I remember as I was driving up thinking, okay, it's got this part, and more importantly was when I got to the archives, there was actually nobody running the archives. Is the interim between the time I left and the time they hired somebody else. So I didn't even have a key. Security had to let me into the room, and then I just started rifling through boxes. So things were literally all over the place. There were several helmets. It's like, oh, that one looks good. I grabbed that one. And there was I remember a box of jumpsuits. There were a number of jumpsuits that were, they don't have anything on them. And then it's like the chest armor, there were probably less of those. There was the flexible armor, and you talk about the arm wrist rocket things. Those, I know the foam ones you speak of, but the other armor, the chest armor, was actually cast in the same mold as the fiberglass, but it's flexible. So visually they look very good, typically very good. at least at the time they would have. The ones that was in the archives had little bends in them, so they were a little warped and everything. So I wouldn't have grabbed one of those. So the ones I grabbed were fiberglass ones. And then I just running around and grabbing whatever on there. Like I said, the biggest thing that I was concerned about was the rocket pack, because everyone we had a number of them. They were all out. They weren't in boxes. They were laid out on a shelf. Actually, there was I think another box, a big crate with a couple of them in there, but they all had something wrong with them. Particularly there's little engine, the nozzles, the jet nozzles on the ends, on the backs. Those all of those were cracked or something. I might have even taken one off of one and stuck it on it to make two good ones. I can't recall, but and then the rocket the missile was typically cracked or broken or not on there. So it was, I grabbed the one that looked visually the most complete.
So I have a question for you. You talk about the jetpack, which is the bane of my existence when it comes to putting on the costume. You obviously have to have more than one person to help put that thing on. So you know what's on the outside of the costume. You can see the armor, you can see the gauntlets, you can see the flight suit, but what about the stuff that you can't see, like the jetpack harness, like that scuba harness? How did you know to grab the scuba harness so that you could secure the jetpack? That's a huge piece. Without that harness, was that built into the vest, or because mine is separate? You have to put it on separate. It's got straps. It's considered accurate for what that's worth, but it's a whole separate piece. How did you know to grab that part when grabbing all the different pieces?
Well, I knew I had to hang it somehow, so I knew to look for it. It is a separate piece. I doubt it was necessarily with the armor. And again, there were several of those, and those were all intact. So as I recall, there's a metal frame that has the two hooks that, up at the top, and then down below there's two like metal extended pieces of flat stock that stick out. So you hook it and then you latch it into there so it doesn't flop. But yeah, and then you just thread it through the back. But yeah, like I said, I knew I had to hang it somehow. I knew I had to attach, so I knew to grab that.
I would never have thought coming into something without that knowledge. I would never have thought to grab this big metal scuba harness. That's what I need to put the jetpack on there. That's pretty awesome to have that.
Well, if I didn't, we would have just used gaffer's tape and.
You had mentioned another point to the jetpack is that you said the one that you wore had small tanks inside of it for gas.
It had the mounts for tanks. Yeah. Inside, if and I'm not sure if it would have been like a CO2 cartridge or a fire extinguisher type thing, but if you were to look at it, there was a structure inside, because you could see it from the backside, the part that's up against your back. You could see it was open there, and that's how they would have put the tanks in. So there were the metal straps that held the thing in. So I would assume they would have just put it in and popped it in and snapped it in, and again maybe used gaffer's tape to wrap it together. But then the tanks would have been held upside down. So it had this metal structure that I know that the other backpacks didn't have, because they're just hollow fiberglass. But this one had, and it wasn't a intense heavy metal mechanism thing, but it was it was heavy enough that it added weight to it.
So potentially this could have been the same jetpack that was in the scene where you see Boba Fett leave the sail barge and he fires up his jetpack and he flies over to the skiff. It could have been that same jetpack, because that one you actually saw,
Right.
Flame and smoke come out.
Right. The only thing
always considered. Yeah.
The only thing is that it had this big scar on it, and I believe I have a picture.
Yeah, we've always we've always thought that was the pack that Han hit with the vibro stick and
Right.
sent Boba Fett into the side where, you know, he's flying behind Luke, kicking the guard in the face, and then he hits the side of the sail barge. That's what we've always taken that as, is that was the pack, a historic pack, I mind you, that was the pack that led to Boba's demise eventually.
Yeah. So there you go. That's the,
Yep.
and that was taken at the archives. That's not the current archives. That was the original archives. But yeah, but the thing is, to me, I had heard something, and you guys probably heard this more than I did, or might have researched it more. And this was relatively recently, that it wasn't a laser blast. It wasn't that spark thing that he hit, that Boba got. There was a shot intended. Maybe they never shot it. That it was a lightsaber gash. So,
Fascinating.
so because it certainly looks, it certainly looks more like you know, it's a different type of damage than one would create if it was just like, oh, it blew up. You know, there's a slash across this, not a like a explosion point. So
That would have been a lot cooler.
Yeah, right. So the
Much
way
better
he
than just
came
being
out,
thrown into a pit.
Just what's next for you, Don? What are you getting into?
There you go. Yeah.
What's your future look like?
Bleak. No, I've been haven't been working in the film business for a number of years. I work for a company that makes trauma training mannequins for the military and first responders. So I design these mannequins, and it's actually a spinoff of it's a spinoff of a spinoff of a spinoff of the original model shop. So it was started 13 years ago now, by the company that bought the model shop back in 2006. So we make these trauma training mannequins that are with horrible injuries, that people use out in the field for first aid. So
not just your normal CPR type mannequins.
No, these have amputations, and they have all sorts of, there's in the world of emergency medicine, there's different types of phases. Mm-hmm. There's a point of injury. So there's the first thing you have to do is run in there and, basically try to keep them alive. And you do that by almost any means necessary. So it's tourniquets and packing wounds and that sort of thing. And then you go to the next level where stabilizing, and then you go to the next level, long-term field care, what they call long-term field care. These are those first two phases typically. And then once you get into the hospital, that's considered a clinical mannequin. And that's where the basic ones that you see that like the CPR ones are just that they just do that. They don't have these other abilities. So there's all sorts of medical procedures that they do to stabilize somebody when they're wounded, and particularly in a gruesome manner. Different ways of administrating medicines and intubations and collapsed lungs and all sorts of stuff. And that's what ours do. And they're animatronic. So they move, they breathe, they do different things like that. Yeah. So, and they can be configured in different ways so that they could accommodate different training scenarios. So.
Wow, light years away from the sands of Tatooine, that's for sure.
Definitely.
But a dotted line back to your experience with R2D2 and that level of animatronics. You said you built your own R2 unit. That to me is absolutely fascinating. I know I have a lot of friends that are in that space as well, and putting together and having it move and the controls. That's a very different skill set, and pretty admirable. That's awesome.
Well, I started out in the film business working on a movie called The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, and so I helped. I did I was on the team that built the animatronics for that. So I actually came from a creature making background technically, and morphed into that type of work was getting fewer and far between. So I morphed into the model making, which required a similar set of skills from an engineering standpoint. So
That's awesome.
so yeah.
That's actually what I was going to comment on. I'm, reading up on you and your background, Don. Like, I think all of us as costumers here within the Bounty Hunters Guild, like we can relate because the skills and the time that you put in to develop those skills to become a model maker, your time at ILM and all of that, right? Like you got to spend time as Boba Fett, which is great, but also you're an incredibly gifted, artist who's put products into the media that we enjoy, not just Star Wars, but a lot of these other Disney projects. And as you mentioned, like the Fly. And, I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done in these seminal pieces that we have. And, I guess my big question there was, was the bringing that skill set that you had from animatronics over to model making. Was there a project that you got to work on from your time at ILM and in the model shop that you particularly are proud of and want to share more with people?
Oh, there's several. I'm really proud of, although it's not exactly in the same vein of what you're questioning, but I'm really proud of the work I did with R2 for the prequels. And that time I had just a tremendous fun amount of time regarding that. But as far as individual things, there are two that stand out. One is the pirate ships for Pirates of the Caribbean. Being able to create those was really fun. I had just come off of work on one of the Star Wars films and went right into the Matrix sequels. I was working on those. And so we were dealing with both of these fantasy type worlds, creating stuff. And from an artistic standpoint, the freedom of that is really cool, but you can kind of make anything because no one's seen it before, right? With Star Wars, there's a certain aesthetic that you have to follow, but you still have a lot of freedom. With Matrix, well, it seemed we were making a lot of stuff with gloop, like just like blobby things. So there was nothing like grounded in reality. We went hit pirates, and all of a sudden I was building pirate ships. I mean, not that this was like my little boy's dream, growing up or something like that, but that was really cool. And the engineering that goes into that. And here we were, like I said, just come off of these fantasy films, and now we're working in an art form that's thousands of years old, and it had to follow a certain set of rules for it to really work. So we actually had to really build these things like real ships. And they brought in a shipwright, a guy named Peter Bailey, who was a local guy that built ships, and he taught us how to build ships. We did it a little differently because we were making models, but these were not small ships. I think the smallest one we made was 17 feet long. We eventually made one that was 30 feet long. So that was a ton of fun. That was had so much fun working on it. And I did a series of ships builds. Hollywood is weird in that all of a sudden everyone's doing the same thing. So we did Pirates of the Caribbean, and I went right on to Peter Pan. I built Hook ship for Peter Pan with Jeremy Sumter as Peter Pan and Jason Isaacs as Captain Hook. And then went right into, I think, Pirates 2. And then I did War of the Worlds, where I made a ferry ship that overturned. So it was like 5 years of just building nothing but ships all of a sudden. months before I started, I had never built a ship before. So
sail barge, desert skiff to pirate ship.
So that was fun. And then the other thing that I'm really proud of, part of the Star Wars universe, is I made the Vader mask that goes on to Anakin at the end of Revenge of the Sith. So
Nice.
Wow.
and I had a special connection to that because when I was at the archives, one of the things I had to do was clean out the archives, and because stuff was literally just thrown in there in storage. And I was going, in my early days there, it was just a matter of going through everything and seeing what was there. There was a lot of garbage, there was not prop related, just garbage that go through. We had stuff, a few things in crates here and there that had to be pulled out and displayed, or not necessarily displayed, but just the crate gotten rid of because we didn't need the crate anymore. So I was cleaning out. There's this one crate that essentially looked empty, and I was about to, move it outside to get it thrown away. And I decided, I better look in the bottom because it had like a layer of newspaper and popcorn and stuff in there. So it was big enough that I had to climb in there and start picking up, and there was this bag in there, and I peeled out the bag, and it was the Vader helmet, the Vader mask and neck piece from Return of the Jedi that Luke pulls off of Vader. And I was like, holy cow, I almost threw this away. So I pulled it out, put it on the shelf, made sure from that point on, anything I was throwing away, there was nothing in there. And so that was a favorite piece, and it was a beautiful piece too. It wasn't detailed on the inside. It had a little bit of detail. It had like little motor, like this iris mechanism for the eyes, but because you weren't really going to see the inside of it, there wasn't much detail. But on the outside, it was just gorgeous. I'm not sure I think it's Brian Archer is the prop maker that made it, and it was just beautifully made, and then such an iconic piece. So when Revenge of the Sith came along, and I was working as a senior model maker on that, this scene came up where they wanted the mask to go on. Now they made a Vader costume for Hayden in Australia, and they shot him laying on the table with partial costume on, and they did shoot, I think, a mask or something, but it was just more for reference than anything. So they needed this insert, the hero shot of it coming down. And when I heard about that, I right away went to the model supervisor, Brian Grenan, and I said, I got to do that. I've got to do that mask. You got to let me do that mask. So he did. And then there was a funny story about it. I don't know how much time you got, but there's a funny story about it because I'm going to tell it anyway. All the things that we did at ILM had some sort of animatic, that showed the sequence, typically. And in this animatic, they had the footage of Hayden with this, digital mask that was going on him. And the mask, as it's coming down, you have the two tube parts on the mask. It's split here at the top one, and I'm watching the animatic, and I said to the effects supervisor, I said that's wrong, that where it splits. He goes, well, we have to build it this way because that's what the animatic is. I says, yeah, but it's wrong. It can't split that way. That's not the way it's split in Return of the Jedi. It's like, well, George approved this, so he must know. I says, I'm telling you one thing right now. George doesn't remember everything. I says, and that's wrong. I says, the fans will hate it. The fans will call it out as an error. Well, I says, can you just ask George the next time we talk to him? I says, if you want, I can ask him. And no. So they went to a meeting, and then I got word back, and the effects supervisor says, George said, yes, do it like in Return of the Jedi, just like the animatic shows. And I'm like, that is wrong. The animatic is wrong. It's not like in Return of the Jedi. And I went and got reference photos of how the mask looks, and I sent it to them. I says, can you show George these? And finally they showed him, and he said yes. So we built it the way it looks in Jedi. Now, interestingly enough, somebody pointed out to me that in Empire Strikes Back, when he's in the chamber, the mask actually splits at the upper part. So, but it's hard to see, but regardless. Why they did that, the different split, why they just didn't reference Jedi, I'm not quite sure.
You just have the unique claim of being able to call out George Lucas as being wrong on one of his own props. It's a slippery slope. It's dangerous because he doesn't like to be corrected. So you have to show him. You have to show him. So. So anyway, so I got to make that, and it was a lot of fun. It was really cool. I didn't build it by myself. I built all the interior stuff. We had somebody else cast the outer part. A guy named model maker named John Duncan helped detail the inside because we were running out of time. He detailed the inside of the lower part, the neck piece, and then Carol Bauman painted it for me. But it was a fun project to be involved with, and one of my
gorgeous helmet.
It was, I think, the last thing I did on a Star Wars film too. I think it was the last project I worked on.
Nice. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight a little bit of your model making background, because again, all of us here as customers, right? We've gone through the hurdles of trying to recreate something that was built 40 years ago, and we want to appreciate those people that put in the work before us to build these, essentially museum pieces is what they're becoming now, so that we can share that reality with the world.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was funny. I actually, for something else that you guys will probably see in June, I was at the Lucasfilm Archives yesterday. The first time I had been there, I don't know how long, and I used to work, I worked there. I actually moved the collection to that facility. So I was at Skywalker Ranch yesterday, and it was very, very bizarre, very nostalgic to be back and remembering all these things. And all the people that I used to work with there are not there anymore. But more interestingly is because they're getting ready for the Lucas Museum in Los Angeles. So many things are going to be moved down there and going to be part of that collection now. And everything is just treated like I wasn't allowed to touch anything. I couldn't touch anything that I built, which was very, very amusing. And I saw stuff that that I hadn't seen in years. In person, but everyone, they're like putting on white gloves to move anything or touch anything. It's like, I never use white gloves, but whatever.
Back in the day, you just throw it in a crate and call it good.
Well, yeah, and I have to say that when we were making stuff for the prequels, certainly by then we all were aware of the phenomenon. We were all aware, and having worked in the archives and seen the level of builds of everything that was in the original films, particularly the very first film, I don't want to say it's crude because that implies poor, but it wasn't as detailed as one would think. And I used to have that reaction a lot with people that would look at original props, and it's like, wow, that's a lot rougher than I expected. And you could see glue chunks on it, and you could props and costumes and models and that. Matte paintings are a great example because you look at them, you could see the brush strokes, but on film they knew exactly how much they can get away with, and that was true of the models and the costumes and the props and everything as well. And but when we went to make the prequels, I certainly in my mind, and I know a couple other people felt this way too, that this stuff's going to wind up in a museum someday. You're making something that is going to be held onto for a long period of time. So things were glued down on a little extra specially hard, or you tried not to make it like only last through the shot. We tried to make it for in perpetuity. It's also bizarre to see, like, Vader's mask. I've got pictures of me working on it, and it just scattered on a very messy desk of other parts and everything. And now it's, in glass cases, being touched with white gloves. So
with those white gloves, did you happen to move any green Boba Fett pieces, like green bracers or a green backpack or anything like that by chance?
I actually didn't see any Boba Fett stuff, because the way the archives, when I was there, the building that they built was a 2-level barn, and the archive collection was in the second level, and the first level was film and library books. George bought in the late 80s the Paramount Pictures library, the actual research library. So it was nothing but rows and rows. It literally looked like a bookstore. You walk in there and there's just rows and rows and rows of books. And all the archive stuff was in the second floor. So we had costumes, props, everything in the second floor. That was only the original trilogy stuff. So we had a finite collection. That nothing more had been built for those. What we had was there, Mm-hmm. And then after I left, they built a second barn attached to it that was connected via a bridge. And by that point, then they were outputting not only prequel stuff, but some of the special edition stuff. And so that at that point, they split the collection, and they moved all the wardrobe, all the costumes to a special facility on the second building, and they have it properly archived, so that the fabric is not being stressed on how it's displayed and everything. And that's where the Boba Fett costume was. And they didn't let me in that part. So I didn't see any Boba Fett. I wanted to see, I was trying to get them as part of what I was doing. I was trying to get them to get a C-3PO over. They said, oh no, they pulled the 3PO off of the support stand that they had. So they no longer had it displayable. So
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see.
yeah, I'm anticipating this is a June thing, so you'll see. So
Very good.
Don, I think we need to wrap this up a little bit. I know we could probably sit here and talk Boba Fett and Star Wars all day. Lastly, though, I want to ask, are there any upcoming appearances that we may be able to see you at?
Yeah, I'm not going to be at the celebration in Europe. However, as part of I'm president of the Grant E. Mara STEAM Foundation, and the foundation is powering, we're calling it, sponsoring the Droid Builders Academy, STEAM Academy. So similar to how Anaheim had the STEAM room where kids could go in and do a bunch of different STEAM activities. We're sponsoring that for Europe. So so that the foundation will be sponsoring that for Star Wars Celebration. So I think there's something coming up in Ohio. I'm probably not going to be doing many like convention type things, or it does never seem to work out well. But I'm going to be doing something for in Ohio. Again, it's actually through the STEAM program, STEAM Foundation, for in Cincinnati. I'm not quite sure. It's part of COSI.
Okay.
The museum and
yeah, I'm Boston based now, but I'm originally from Ohio. So I'm originally from the Dayton area.
Yeah, COSI is a great museum. I've been there before. But
that was a field trip for a lot of times during school. We went to COSI. Right?
Yeah. It's a May the 4th exhibition. So
it's coming up.
Yeah,
coming up.
Another May the 4th.
Right on. Well, Don, I want to thank you again for your time. I honestly, when I reached out over Instagram, it was a shot in the dark. I'm glad that eventually it led to this. This was great. It was awesome hearing from you, and I'm definitely going to make sure that we like to keep in touch, and because you may not think it, but you are there's a large part of Star Wars that you're involved in, and so. We thank you for being a part of the Legion, an honorary member, and donating your time this morning.
Oh, my pleasure.
I got to say, on behalf of the Boba Fett's across the world, I know it's not your favorite part of Star Wars.
Let's not make a big deal of that. I mean, I like Boba Fett. I don't want to be. I don't want to be villainized.
What happens on the BHG call stays on the BHG call. But thank you for giving us Bob Fett and cooking the books for Jabba. Really and truthfully, one of the most unique parts of Boba Fett is what you brought to not just the character in the movie and the extra scenes, but the behind the scenes stuff. Casey alluded to the amazing mustache. There are a lot of individuals out there who do immortalize you as a not just as the character as Boba Fett, but as a person, as Don. And I can't thank you enough for that, for being really a huge part of our lives, Boba Fett, and just the culture in general. You bring a certain level of chillness, I want to say, to the character that adds a different perspective, and it's really great getting to meet you and talk with you and learning some new things. It's pretty cool to hear some just how deep you were in that creation of the costume itself. I find that fascinating, and thank you so much for your time on Saturday, and I hope we can meet again.
I hope we all meet in person one of these days. That'd be great.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you made the mustache cool before Pedro did, so you got
I guess I'm not a real Mandalorian though, because I took my mask off. So
the less said about that, the better. So cool, appreciate it.
all right, thanks, guys.
All right, thank you, Don.